Hello, everyone, and welcome to Running Tales, the podcast where we tell extraordinary stories of everyday runners, wheelchair racers, and walkers. My name's Craig Lewis, and as we fumble our way into 2026, booking up those all important races and checking if any money has fallen down the back of the sofa for new trainers, I'm here today to remind you that the joy of running and movement should be the most important metric that we measure in this sport of ours. And that's why this podcast shuns things like VO2 max and in-depth training regimes and instead talks about runners who've overcome all manner of challenges to achieve their goals. Now, today's guest, Steve Cushing, certainly fits that description. Steve describes himself as a 75-year-old retired GP and back-of-the-pack runner with two artificial hips and a pacemaker. But folks, that only really tells half of his story. He's run extreme events, including the Ice Marathon, which takes place within the Arctic Circle, and at the other end of the heat spectrum, the infamous Marathon des Sables. Having recently overcome a spate of injuries, Steve's now training to take on the high-altitude, multi-day Mustang Trail Race in Nepal. So, folks, I'm really excited for this conversation, and without any further ado, let's welcome Steve Cushing to the Running Tales podcast. Hey, Steve, how are you doing?
I'm great, thanks, Craig. And yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. We're surviving through the ice and not quite yet snow yet, but we're all surviving. And I know we've just had a little conversation in what I'll over the top call the green room about this, but it can be something that stops you running. But we've just said you've managed to keep going and keep your training going for this upcoming event, haven't you?
I guess I've got no choice. I mean, when I get out there to Nepal, I won't be able to say, "Oh, I don't like the weather today. I'm going to do a. I'm not bothering." I've just got to get on and do it. And Sunday was a particular day. It was blowing a hoolie. It was freezing cold, and I'd have loved to have just stayed at home. It wasn't the best run I've ever had. But I got out and I did it, and a few more miles under the belt, and just felt a bit more mental resilience as well, I guess.
Fantastic. So before we go any further and perhaps go a little bit into your backstory, as it were, tell everyone a little bit about the Mustang Trail Race that you're set to do. I think it's coming up in April, isn't it?
Yeah, it actually starts on the 31st of March, and it's in Mustang, which is in Nepal, heading into towards Tibet. Mustang looks like a really interesting place to go. It's not been open to people very long, so not a lot of people have been there. But the actual trail race itself is run over 8 days, 8 different stages. Total distance is approximately 175 kilometers, and there's about 8,500 meters of vertical. I guess the big problem, though, is the fact that we're running at altitude, and the altitude we're running at is anywhere between 2,900 meters at the lowest, and at the highest point we get to 4,300 meters. So I think
Wow.
I might be gasping a bit and looking for
Yeah.
a bit of oxygen as I kind of try and drag myself around the trails. I'm really excited. I'm really looking forward to getting there.
A friend of mine, Simon Hollis, big shout out to Simon from Go Beyond Challenge, runs an event in Nepal as well, and he describes it as a really beautiful place to go running and with lovely friendly people. Is that part of the reason that attracts you to this race?
Yeah, I mean, there's two reasons. Well, one is I was actually in Nepal. As you mentioned, I'm a retired GP. Well, as a medical student, and I hate to say it, but it was in 1972, so it's well over 50 years ago. I actually went to Nepal for 8 weeks to do part of my medical studies. And I've always wanted to go back. And although I've traveled extensively, I've never actually got back to Nepal. So I really want to get to Nepal just to go back there. But I love the mountains, and to be in the mountains and to just to enjoy that scenery and that environment. And as you rightly say, yeah, I think the people, particularly going to these more remote areas, are often incredibly welcoming and friendly, and are willing to give when they've got nothing to give. And it's a real lesson for us in the West, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And we speak to a lot of different people. We've got a lot of different listeners on the Running Tales podcast. But I think broadly, most people within the running world, they do the half marathons, we do our marathons, and so on. This is something on a completely different level. How do you train for something like this? Because you can't, I guess, you can't pop over to Nepal or somewhere too hot to train for it, and this sort of distance is kind of insane.
Yeah, it's about, I guess I've done quite a few, longish distance events. When I did the Marathon des Sables, it was probably not a dissimilar sort of distance,
Mm.
but didn't have the altitude there, although I had a lot more heat. Training, I'm working with a coach and he's helping me to put a program together. Currently, I'm actually doing quite a bit of tempo work, doing some hill intervals, but I'm also doing sessions, which is the most important, just a long time on my feet, and a lot of hiking. Because there is absolutely no way anybody, but particularly myself as a back of the pack runner, as you say, there's no way I'm going to be running the whole event. And over the next couple of weeks, I'll be carrying on with some more tempo training. But then I'm getting to the stage when it would be more race specific. And for those final couple of months, I'll be doing a lot of long distance stuff, a lot of long days on the trails, and then starting to put together some back to back or even back to back to back sessions. So going out, doing a long day, and then going out the next day and doing another long day, trying to mimic the sort of situation that I'll face when I get out to Mustang, minus the altitude, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned there about the walking, and I think we all kind of know that when you're doing your ultras, it's probably going to involve some kind of walking, particularly the sort of distances you're looking to do there. I remember speaking to a lady called Emily Moore on the podcast a while ago, and Emily did the other event I mentioned in Nepal, Capital to Country, and she actually took a conscious decision to speed hike, if that's a correct term, the whole thing. So she didn't
Yeah.
run at all. She's a good runner, but she didn't bother running in that event. And actually, she said she only finished an hour or two behind some really quite accomplished trail runners who sort of ran, walked, and attempted to run the whole thing. So it's amazing what you can achieve by through that kind of hiking and how important it is.
You're absolutely right. When I did the Marathon des Sables, a huge amount of that, I speed hiked, I power hiked. And sometimes you see people on the trails and they're running uphill. I say running, but it's in inverted commas. Because
Yeah.
actually, you're actually expending far more energy than you need to, and not getting any additional benefit. And good power hikers will often power hike past people who think they're running. And in the process, you're not using anything like as much energy. And obviously, that's so important when you've got such a long, long day and a long series of days as well. So, yeah, a lot of it will be power hiking, and that's what a lot of my training will include.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, that kind of power hiking idea. I did what would probably be quite a baby ultra for you. I did 100k in the Isle of Wight, the Isle of Wight Challenge, and my wife and I, it was the first time we did anything like that. And so Michelle and I set out and we ran sort of the first marathon. Which is crazy to sort of say the first marathon, and then we got about halfway on this, and we were with a friend of ours, Darren, and Darren had done this Isle of Wight challenge about 6 or 7, 8 times, I think. And at halfway, he just pulled out these hiking poles and he said, "We're just going to walk the rest. We're going to hike the rest." And we were like, "Eh, what?" And as we carried on throughout, there was groups of runners who were running at, I don't know, 12, 13-minute miles, maybe a bit faster, 10-minute miles, but then they were kind of exhausting themselves and having to walk at, I don't know, 20-minute mile pace. And we kept up this constant sort of 15-minute mile walk, and we were just overtaking them all. And it was like, this is for the, I'm sure ultra runners like yourself would be going, "Oh, well, well, thanks for catching up." But for us, it was like, this is incredible.
Power hiking, even the top ultra runners will have to power hike some of it.
Yeah.
Tom Evans, who recently won the UTMB, I mean, he talks about power hiking. And you mentioned about hiking poles,
Mm.
and there's no question about it. I will have my hiking poles with me. And certainly on anything that's more than just a slight incline uphill, I will be walking, and then I'll be running on the level. And when it's not too technical, I'll be running on the downhills. But when I say running, it certainly still won't be at any fast speed. It'll be a
Yeah.
plod. And one of the nice things about the Mustang Trail Race is that they don't have cut-off times. They want to make sure you finish. And even nicer, On the way round, there's some interesting places to visit, some sort of monasteries and caves with cave paintings. And if you go in, they stop the clock when you go in, and they restart it as you come out because they want to encourage you to actually enjoy the experience and the culture. And it's not just about the race. And certainly for me, it isn't, because there's no way I'm looking for a podium position unless there's a podium place for the over 75s, which I'll definitely win. That's one of the advantages of getting to 75. You tend to win your age group.
Yeah. Well, especially when you're doing an event like this, because I was going to come on to this. I'm hesitating, waiting for people to start shouting ages and accusations at me from the sidelines. But you are 75. You mentioned, or we mentioned within the intro there, that you've had various issues to overcome, recent injuries. But before that, I think I'm trying to look back at my notes now. Was it hip replacements or something, or and running with a pacemaker and so on? So
Yeah, yeah.
this is
I've had,
unusual.
yeah, I've had both hips replaced, and I got a thing called a heart block, so I needed a pacemaker for that. And I never think about my hips. I never think about my pacemaker. They don't give me any problems. They're not an issue at all. So you just get on with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, more recently, it's been a real problem. I was actually meant to be doing the Mustang Trail Race in 2024. And in November of 2024, I went up to the Lake District to the Kendall Mountain Festival, and I was doing a bit of training. And suddenly I felt my Achilles tendon, and I couldn't stop because I was out in the middle of nowhere, headed back. And before I got back to the car, I'd ruptured my Achilles tendon. So there was no way I was going to be doing the Mustang Trail Race just a few months later. So I rearranged for 2025. And in April 2024, when I should have been doing the Mustang Trail Race, I was up on the Isle of Lewis. My coach and physio had said that I would be able to start running when I got back. And I was out on my own one day on the cliffs doing some photography. And my right leg slipped and my left leg folded underneath me, and I felt a crack. And I'd ruptured my quadriceps tendon, which is the most horrific injury. I've never known anything like it. So that was 2025 out of the question. So
Yeah.
it's third time lucky. So I'm hoping I get there.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I mean, I'm sort of approaching 50 now, and I know it's slightly harder to recover from injuries. Did you find it a lot harder to get over those injuries at the age you're at now?
I don't know, because I didn't have them when I was 50. So I had nothing to compare them with. I just know that certainly the quadriceps tendon injury is a really horrible injury to recover
Mm,
from. It's not dissimilar in terms of rehab to an ACL.
yeah.
You hear about professional footballers, it's 9 months out as soon as you get an ACL, and
Mm,
it's just as bad, if not worse. And I know that there are lots of people who've ruptured the quadriceps tendon, and 12 months, 2 years on, they're still struggling just to walk or to get up and downstairs.
yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, yes, it's a fact that as you get a bit older, it does take longer to recover. But I put the work in basically, Craig.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't do that. So I did the rehab, I did the physio, I did the strengthening exercises, I did the stretching, and it's paid dividends because I'm back to running again.
Fantastic. Oh, well done you, Steve, and I'm sure it will hold you in good stead and see you along the Mustang Trail this year as we
Yeah.
move into 2026. The thought that I suppose the obvious question that comes to me is have you always been into running? Have you always been a runner, or is this something you came to later on?
No, I actually started running as a schoolboy.
Right.
Um, I went to a school where rugby was the main winter sport.
Yeah.
And although I ended up being 6 foot tall, I was actually the smallest and the youngest kid in my class when I was at school. I think I was actually known as Titch, which wasn't very flattering. And when it came to rugby, I used to try and hide on the wing and hope the ball never came anywhere near me, because I just didn't want to know. Certainly didn't want anybody to tackle me. And one of the options was to do cross country, which was a godsend. And I actually found I was never going to be a county runner or an international runner, but I enjoyed it and I did quite well.
Mm.
So I started running at probably 12, 13, 14, did cross country. Yeah, carried on and off throughout my life. I didn't do a lot at university, but then when I was in my early 30s, I started doing a lot more running. I think running was very popular at that time. And that's when I did quite a number of marathons, including the London, where I got my best at, I think it was something like 3 hours 18, 3 hours 19 at the London. And then shortly after that, we talked about my injuries before. Shortly after that, I was involved in one of my other hobbies at the time, which was horse riding. And to cut a long story short, the horse I was on had a problem and I didn't know, and it
Yeah.
reared up in the air. I was vertical and couldn't stay in the saddle and crashed out onto my back onto concrete. And as I lay there, and I can still visualize it now, the horse collapsed as like a pack of cards, and his hindquarters just came right through the middle of my pelvis,
Oh, wow.
smashed it in four places. So they weren't even sure I was going to live, never mind walk.
Mm.
And they certainly told me I'd never run again. So I stopped doing marathons, but I just carried on doing relatively short distances. But yeah, carried on running the whole way through. And then it's kind of fluctuated. So, done some marathons, done some ultras, eased off a bit. But I've always enjoyed running and always got a real benefit from it as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned there you obviously had this horrific injury. It was questionable as to whether you'd live, let alone run. Certainly questionable as to whether you'd run. You dialed it back to short distances. What sort of made you take that leap back up again to start doing marathons again, and then to move it on to doing not only ultras but some of the extreme ultras that you've done?
It was a tiny, tiny little article in one corner of a page of Runner's World magazine, and it was entitled Ice Marathon.
Right.
And it was about the Antarctic Ice Marathon, which is held just a few hundred miles from the South Pole. And it was talking about katabatic winds and sub-zero temperatures and running on ice and snow. And I thought that sounds really interesting. And unfortunately for me, or fortunately, there was a website. So I went and had a look, and I had absolutely no intention of taking part. I just thought that looks really interesting.
Mm.
But somehow it got to me. And I kept going back to this website. And I eventually kind of broached the subject to my wife and said, I said I was never going to run another marathon, dear. I said, yeah, well, yes. I said, well, I think I might do another one. She said, I don't mind. It's up to you. So I said, well, don't you think you better ask me where I'm going to do it? So she looked at me and said, go on. And I said, Antarctica. And she said, you're mad. Okay. A lot of people have said that subsequently. But she was more than happy. And off I went. And in 2006, went down to Antarctica. And what an experience. And I think I'm right in saying I'm the ninth person in the world ever to have run a marathon inside the Antarctic Circle, which is my only claim to fame. But I'll have it on my gravestone one day.
Oh,
Great experience.
yeah, and it's a pretty cool claim to fame to have. Just to rewind slightly, I mean, I'm thinking about the general population here initially, but then even other runners, and they might be looking at that and going, "Oh, do you know what? I like doing a marathon. I like going out and running. Maybe I'll go and run in the snow like we've got here now." But what on earth attracts somebody to an event like that? Is that a question that you can easily answer, or is it just in the
No,
moment almost?
no, I can't, and I can't tell you why I want to do 175 in Nepal. I can tell you some of the reasons.
Yeah,
But I've thought about it often, and I don't know what it is that drives me. But I do know I am driven to take on challenges, to push myself, and just to see how far I can go,
mm.
see what I can achieve. And I think one of the sad things to me is so many people never know quite what their potential is.
Yeah,
Um, So it's a question of pushing myself, and I don't think it matters about the age. It's what can I achieve at this point in time. So why did I want to do the Antarctic Marathon? I've no idea. It just looked like a just something different to do.
Um,
And it was.
yeah, and you mentioned, I'm just intrigued, really. Just one more question on that. Is that something that's kind of governed your life in general, or is it something that kind of applies to running?
I think most people who know me would say I'm fairly driven.
Mm,
Um, I don't. If I do something, I go for it. I did that, I think, professionally. One of my other interests and hobbies is photography, particularly wildlife photography. And when I do something like that, I take it incredibly seriously. I have fun with it, but I don't see the point of doing something like that and doing it in a slapdash sort of way.
yeah.
If I want to do something, I want to do it well and get the most of it out of it I can.
No, brilliant. And obviously you mentioned that finished being the ninth person to complete a marathon in the Arctic Circle. Am I therefore right in kind of surmising that meant this was a very you were in a, you're one of the first people to do that event, therefore?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Basically, this was the first time
yeah,
it had been run as the Antarctic Ice Marathon.
mm,
It had been that three people had done, as far as I know, three people had done a marathon at the South Pole, which is amazing because the South Pole's 10,000 meters, what's it, 10,000 feet altitude thing. So it's quite high
wow,
South Pole. So you had altitude to deal with as well as
yeah,
the temperature conditions. So three people had done it. And then one of the people who'd run that marathon organized the ice marathon. And there were only nine of us did it that first year. And I was the sixth out of the nine of us who did the ice marathon. But it's been run every year since then. And I think it's
mm,
now been run about 20 times. And there's quite a lot of people do it every year now. I mean, it's still in the tens and the twenties, but there's more and more people who've done it. But this was the first time it has actually been held as an event.
yeah. So what did an event like that look like as you did it, and what was it like running in those extreme conditions? Because I imagine it's like nothing most of us can imagine.
It was brilliant. I mean, the first problem was we got to Punta Arenas. We were in Chile, and we were waiting to fly into Antarctica. And we flew in a Aleutian jet, the sort of plane you see when food aid is taken out to third world countries. And we were due to land on a 1 mile strip of blue ice. So that's pretty treacherous sort of landing, and there's
Yeah,
some incredible pilots. But they had to wait for the weather conditions to be right before we could take off. I had something like 20, 23 weather checks over a 3 day period waiting to go in. So you can imagine the anxiety and the pressure. It was just mounting and mounting.
mm,
You'll have a weather check at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock comes, no, it's not safe to fly. We'll tell you again at 1 o'clock, and you were just waiting. But eventually we got there, and at about 11 o'clock at night, I stepped out of that plane and I stepped onto this 1 mile strip of blue ice, and it was broad daylight.
yeah,
And it was the most amazing experience. And I just stood there and looked around and thought, if Shackleton or Oates or anybody had been in this spot all those years ago, it would have looked just the same as it looks now. Nothing
yeah,
had changed. It was just they had this beautiful, almost like a cobblestone runway, just at all the ice. And then the next morning we set off at 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, several layers of clothing, as you can imagine, and we were just running on this strip of ice. It was a beautiful day for the first 15, 20 miles. We were running between some mountain ranges. And then we turned at 20 miles back at the base camp, and we had a 6 mile loop to finish off. And the wind got up, and we were having 50-mile-per-hour winds. So on the way back, the last 3 miles, I was not only running on ice and snow, when the temperature was, with the wind chill factor about -20, but I was running into a 50-mile-per-hour wind. And I looked, and you could see just massive distances in every direction. And
mm,
whichever way I looked, I couldn't see anybody else or anything else at all. It was just me and this huge expanse. And it was great. And just struggled my way over those last few miles. And eventually there was the base camp and it was done.
Yeah. Oh, I tell you what, Steve. When I'm struggling in the last 6 miles of the Shakespeare Marathon in April, running round glorious Warwickshire, I'm going to have that in my head and think, do you know, Steve can run on the ice in a howling gale of snow in the Arctic. That I can get through this because, yeah, that's pretty exceptional. The other question that comes to my mind is just on the practicalities of the event. I mean, you know, somewhere like that, have you got marshals? Are you entirely self-sufficient? Is anybody looking out for you to make sure I don't know, you don't get frostbite or something?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, in terms of the course, they had little flags every couple of hundred meters, so that well, first of all, where I was a place called Patriot Hills, and it's a base camp where people go to do some scientific research, but also people who want to climb Mount Vinson, which is the highest peak in Antarctica. People who go and ski the last degree to the South Pole, and they all use that as the base. So from the base, the people who were there had gone out in skidoos and had marked out a course for us. It was still on ice and snow, but there was a sort of track to follow.
Yeah.
And then there were these orange flags. So we knew which way we were going. And certainly in the early stages, there were people around keeping an eye out. And that bit where I was totally on my own, as I thought, somebody that actually videoed that. So there must have been somebody nearby, but I
Yeah.
just didn't see them at all. So I never at any stage felt it was dangerous. I never felt uncomfortable. It was just bloody hard work running into a 50 mile per hour wind.
Yeah.
But I felt incredibly safe.
Yeah, and I guess you'd have seen any polar bears coming from a long way off if they
Well,
were
I was
out.
in Antarctica. The polar bears are up in
Oh yes,
yeah, in the
yeah,
Arctic.
yeah,
Didn't see. Well, and that was the other thing. There was no wildlife whatsoever. There was nothing at all. There were no birds. There were no insects. There were no mammals. And the day after the marathon finished, I went off and just wandered off on my own and sat down, and there was total silence. And you don't get that anywhere. But you couldn't hear a thing. You could hear the wind blowing, and that was it. There was no noise of vehicles, of people, of birds singing. There was nothing. It was just total silence.
that must have been just a stunning and incredible experience, and
It
something you
was.
must think back on and go, "Oh wow, did that really happen?"
Yeah, yeah. And then I had to come back and go back to work.
Yeah, that first day back in the office.
Yeah, yeah, it wasn't fun. Actually, the first day back in, I spent half the time doing interviews with BBC and ITV. So that one came down to work and interviewed me, and then in the evening I went into Manchester and did an interview for I think it was for Granada. So
Oh, fab.
that was an unreal day as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, definitely. And just thinking one more question about that event. Um, did they at that time, or I don't know if you know now, did you have to, were there qualifying events for it? Did they sort of look and make sure that the people entering this were going to be capable of running something that was that tough?
But there weren't enough of us mad enough to enter at that stage. I think
They
if they
took
wanted,
whoever entered.
if they wanted qualifying times, they wouldn't have had anybody to run. I can't remember what. I mean, they must have asked. I had some idea that I could do it, that I'd done a marathon before, but
Hmm.
no, I can't. I honestly can't remember. They certainly didn't have any strict criteria at all.
Yeah. So you've ticked that one off, done that incredible experience. I guess you may have had two options then. One was to go back and run your shorter distances, your 5, 10 Ks, and the other was to see what was next along the route for you. And I think it's fair to say you took option two.
I took option two, as I tend to do. Yeah. Um, in the past, when it went around the time I had my riding accident, ultras weren't well known, but things like the Centurion in South Africa, people knew about, and there was the Birmingham to London down the canals. And I'd often looked at those and thought, oh, that would be good to do. But I was busy at work, I had a young family. And then when I had my riding accident, I thought, well, there's no point doing these long distances. But I'd always had an hankering to do one or two of these, and the Marathon des Sables was one of them.
Mm.
So almost as soon as I'd finished the Antarctic marathon, I was signing up for the Marathon des Sables. You know what it's like, you finish one event and I'm never going to do that again. But within a few weeks, oh, what's next? What am I going to do next? And so, yeah, I signed up for the Marathon des Sables and did that 2009, 2010. I can't remember exactly which year that was.
Yeah, and how did you find MDS?
That was great. Some interesting experiences. I'll tell you a little tale. Before I went, I decided I'd try and get some heat acclimatization. So I went down to Liverpool University, and they had a heat chamber there, and they put me on a treadmill, and they over several visits gradually crank the temperature up to about 40 degrees. But
Oh
what they
wow.
won't let you do is run if your core body temperature gets too high. And so the whole time I was running on the treadmill, they were monitoring my temperature. Now you can measure the temperature through people's, the mouth or their ears or various other places, but I shan't tell you which orifice they were using to measure my body temperature. But it's where the sun doesn't shine.
Yeah.
So there I was running on the treadmill with this thermometer stuck up this orifice. And fortunately, it fell out, and I can assure you, I wasn't going to tell them and
No.
let them replace it. So yeah, that was an interesting experience preparing for it. And then when
Yeah.
we got out there, it was a very unusual marathon des Sables because we set off from Ouarzazate, which is in Morocco, and heading out to the base camp. And there was flooding going on. It was a tremendous rain.
Oh
It
wow.
was horrific. And actually, there was so much flash flooding that about 6 or 7 local people died in the flooding. And I was one of the few people who actually got out to the base camp on the first vehicles. And then the road behind us was washed away. And I remember walking around the base camp with some flip-flops on, and my flip-flops were just disappearing in the mud. They were just being sucked off. And they had to take us away from the base camp and find accommodation for 700 people. And day
Mm.
one of the Marathon des Sables was cancelled. And after all the training, we were just there in our tent thinking, is this going to happen?
Mm.
They got us on the road and they got us going eventually, but it was all very uncertain. But I think they made up for it because, as you probably know, there's a long day in the Marathon des Sables.
Yes.
And that's usually around 45, 50 miles. And if you do it in one day and get back to your tent, you've got the next day to recover. But some people sleep out overnight and finish it off on the second day. But you never know until the night before exactly how far it's going to be. So my long day in the Marathon des Sables is the longest they've ever run. It was 57 miles,
Right.
through the desert, and that was one hell of a day. I managed to get it done that day and have a day's rest, so that was good.
Yeah. Yeah. So they made sure it's like in the cricket where they had an extra half hour on it at the end of the day
That's
if
it.
it
Yeah, yeah,
rains.
yeah. We'll give you a few more miles on the long day. You didn't do the first day, so you have to do a bit more now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. How did you find MDS in terms of how hard it was? Because I mean, obviously, look, it's hard. I don't think anyone ever disputes that. But I've spoken to some people who will say, yeah, it's hard, but it's not the toughest foot race on the planet.
Absolutely isn't. Absolutely isn't. But no, I mean it's nice to have that kind of phrase attached to the Marathon des Sables. If I do a talk, I say I've done the Marathon des Sables, which is described as the toughest foot race on earth. But when you think of the Barkley Marathon or
Yeah,
Badwater or somewhere, it's a stroll in the park in comparison with some of those events. But yeah, you're right. It's tough, but it certainly isn't the toughest foot race on earth. I'd love to claim it was, but it isn't.
and it's become really super popular now, hasn't it? At MDS. I mean, some people say it's a little bit too commercialized, but
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that does prove that inverted commas everyday runners, because you've got to be fairly extraordinary to do that, but it's something that is within people's reach. Whereas you mentioned like the Barkley marathons, that's within the reach of very very few people.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think anybody who's a runner could do the Marathon des Sables with the right
Mm.
training. It is difficult, but with the right training and the right mindset, I think it's within the grasp of so many people. And that's what I said before. I want to push myself to see what I can achieve. And I think a lot of people push themselves so far and then stop.
Hmm.
But actually to say, right, I'm going to take on one of these tougher events. I'm going to take on the Marathon des Sables. And I think a lot of people would surprise themselves to what they could do.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's something that's really true about all of us, really. There are levels that we don't even know exist, and so much of running is run in your head, isn't it? Do you I mean, you've spoken about how you kind of like to push your boundaries anyway, but have you found that running's made you more resilient in your life in general?
I would think so. I mean, I think it's very difficult to know because I've only got one life to compare. But
Sure.
I think, I think there's a fair bit of evidence that runners are more resilient, have a better pain threshold, because, we're used to pushing ourselves through the barriers, so that things which other people might find really hard and tough is not as much of a problem. And I think mentally more resilient because we've been to some relatively dark places and know we can push on and push through them. And that applies when people do marathons. It's not just ultras and multi-day
Mm.
events. I think runners who do longer distances do tend to be physically, obviously, but also mentally more resilient.
Yeah, I think that's true. And to be honest, I'd probably go even a step further for people who've maybe not run at all. That first 5K or even that first mile can be have a huge impact on their lives, and it can be massively challenging just to take those first few steps in the world of running.
Absolutely, but once you've taken those first few steps and the first 2 or 3 months for somebody who's never run and starting
Mm.
to learn to run, it's bloody hard, uh,
Yeah.
but it's worth it. And the number of times you hear of people who, having done that, then they do, oh, I'll now I'll do a park run, and then I want to do a 10K, and I think that's how it all happens. That I did the same. I did a 10K, and then did a half marathon, and then what's the next step? And logically, it's a marathon, and then you start looking at other events as well.
Yeah, and you obviously mentioned you're a keen photographer, and you've done some events in some pretty amazing places. How important is getting out and kind of conversing with nature to you when you're running?
Oh, that's yeah. I mean, that's why I'm much now. Although I've done a lot of road running in the past, I'd much rather get up in the hills and get out
Mm.
on the trails. And just I love it when I get up to the lakes. There's myself and my dog, and we go for the whole day, and we hardly see a soul. And we just got the mountains to enjoy and just to walk and to run. So yeah, and again, I think there's a huge amount of evidence that being out in nature is good for your mental health, as is running. So I think to be out running in nature mentally is just so good for you.
Mm. And you've got a pretty incredible backyard to train in there, haven't you?
What, what in the Lake District? Or,
Yeah, in the lakes.
yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I live. I'm an hour away from the Lake District, so it's not on my doorstep. In fact, I live on the Fylde coast, which is, if it gets to 20 feet high, we call it a hill out here.
Yeah.
It's just so flat. So to do any hill training, I've probably got to jump in the car and drive a minimum of three-quarters of an hour and often a bit more. But it's worth it to get up in the hills and to get in the. I can get into North Yorkshire moors and get across to Derbyshire. I can get up into the Lake District, all within about an hour to an hour and a half.
Mm, no, it's not bad at all. That
Yeah.
I think sometimes, I mean, I know I certainly do. I look at my running friends in America, Canada, all those other places, and some of the places they run, and go, "Oh, wow!" But then we kind of forget sometimes we have some pretty special places to run
Oh,
here too.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you get to the lakes, it's just stunning. And,
Mm.
and we get a bit blasé about it, unfortunately. I know I do. It,
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I want to turn back to the Mustang Trail Race and some of the reasons, or some of the other reasons you're running it, which is for a couple of charities, isn't it? Tell us about those.
yeah. I mean, I'm running it. I'll be absolutely honest. I'm running it because I want to run it. I'm running it because I want the experience. I want to push myself. But I'm using it as an opportunity to raise money for two organisations, which are to me are really important. One is goes in the name of Pies, which is totally inappropriate for a runner to be talking about pies. But
Oh, not an
pies,
ultra runner.
yeah, they often say ultra running is a food competition, which interspersed with a bit of running. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
so PI stands for Partners in Education Swaziland. Swaziland that now is actually called Eswatini, but PIES was set up by some people from the northwest of England where I live. And basically, it's providing food for children who are being educated. So a lot of these children are orphans, which is true of a lot of the population of Swaziland. And it's incredible that by just a small sum of £8 a month, £8, sorry, will feed a child for a month. And I
Right.
think if I can raise some money, as I am doing for pies, and not only is it raising money to feed the children, but they're actually starting to help them to become self-sufficient. So they've got beehives and they're growing honey. They've got sewing machines, so they're now starting to make clothing, and getting them to become independent. So it really is an important charity, and all the money, every single penny, there's no administration costs. The trustees are all volunteers. So every single penny that's raised for pies is actually sent out to benefit those kids in Swaziland who otherwise would have a pretty horrible existence. So that's pies. And the other organization is, it's actually not far from you. I think you're in Northampton, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an organization called Everybody Counts. And the reason I'm supporting Everybody Counts is my nephew and his wife. So Andrew and Becky have a daughter called Caitlin. She's a lovely girl. She's 13, but she was born with an incredibly rare genetic condition. There's only a handful of people in the world who have this condition called KIF1A. And it leaves her with a global developmental delay. She's got significant physical and learning disabilities. She's got visual impairment. She's got type 1 diabetes, that means she needs insulin, and she's got autism. And the challenges that that brings in everyday life. I was talking to Andrew just a couple of nights ago, and they were in the process of trying to get Caitlin to bed. And it was going to take them 2 hours most nights to get her to settle down to bed and get to sleep. And you think the pressure that puts on them. And
Mm.
Everybody Counts is a really small organization, but the support it provides is absolutely life changing. So I'll just read out what Andrew says. It provides respite care, Saturday clubs, and specialist activities for children and adults with complex needs. They've given Caitlin a safe, happy place to grow, and they give parents moments of rest that are truly invaluable. And so, in order to carry on, they need some equipment, and they need things like sensory lights to help calm and regulate children, which are relatively cheap.
Mm.
More expensive stuff such as a portable hoist, compact stand aid, an adult changing bed, and they cost £2,000 or £3,000, some of those items. And so I'm hoping that I can raise some money, not only to help pies, but to help Everybody Counts. And as Andrew says, every donation, big or small, helps children like Caitlin experience comfort, dignity, and joy, and helps families breathe a little easier. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting out to Mustang. I'm doing it for myself, but
Mm.
hopefully, if people get behind me and sponsor me, then other people will benefit as well. So it's not just a selfish pursuit.
Yeah. Well, Steve, they sound like two absolutely fantastic charities, and I wish you all the very best for that. We'll put it in the show notes. Well, we'll put it in the show notes anyway. But if you haven't got it to hand, we'll definitely do that. But if you do have it to hand, take this chance now and just let people know where they can go if they're keen to sponsor you.
Yeah, I've set up a couple of GoFundMe pages, and in order to make it easy, I've set up just a single link, and that link will take people to a series of links. So there's a link to pies, there's a link to Everybody Counts, there's a link for details about the Mustang Trail Race, and there's a link to a blog which I'll be writing and keeping going during the event. And in order to get there, there's just one website, one link that people need, which is Linktree, and that's TR stop EE. So Linktree / Steve Cush Mustang, with a capital M for the Mustang. So linktree, tr.ee/Steve Cush, capital M Mustang. And if people go to that link, it'll take them onto the charity links. It'll take them onto details about the Mustang Trail Race. But just a note of caution, some people might go to that link and read about the Mustang Trail Race and might get hooked on the idea of going.
Yeah, be careful. You might
you don't know where it might lead you.
You start out aiming to
go on there. So just if just a few people throw a few pounds in, £8 a month will feed a child. £8 will feed a child for a month. That'll make such a difference.
No, it really does. I mean, I always think how much of a difference, at the end of the day, look, you're quite right. I've run events for charity. At the bottom line, I'm running it for me because I want to run that event. But running can make such a massive difference to these organisations, and so much money. You look at something like the London Marathon to start with, so much money is made for so many incredible organisations through running, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a real spin-off benefit, and hopefully I can raise a few bob, and it will make a difference.
Brilliant. Oh, well, good luck for that, Stephen, and everyone here. Make sure you go and sponsor Steve to do this amazing event. Steve, this is maybe a tad early because you've got to get through this ultra in Nepal yet. But do you have what's kind of next after that? Do you have any other ideas in your head at the moment?
Oh dear. I've got a few ideas in mind. I better tell my family first. Probably. No, I mean, my wife does know, although she's the only, and my coach knows, but they're the only two people who know. But depending on how well I cope with the Mustang and how quickly I recover, I've got an entry in May, middle of May, for an event called the Lap. Right. And the lap, you've probably heard of it, is a single lap around Windermere. So that doesn't sound too bad, does it? But it's 47 miles. It takes in Once Fell and it takes in Loughrick Fell, so there's quite a bit of vertical as well. It starts at 6 o'clock in the morning. I think you've got 20 hours or 24 hours to do it. So it depends. If I'm not going to do it, if there's any risk that I haven't fully recovered. But I just felt, well, I'll have come back. I'll have been running at altitude for 8 days. I should be fairly fit. And if I've recovered from that and I haven't got any injuries, and having had a couple of weeks rest, I can get a little bit more training in, then people who think I'm mad are now listening to this podcast will say, well, yes, now we know you are totally mad. But the lap in Windermere in May is potentially another target. And I've got a few ideas after that, but no, it's only in my head at the moment.
Oh, I absolutely love it, Steve. Well, that gives us every need to keep an eye on your journey and what comes next. And I think it's really exciting and so much good luck to you taking these events on.
Well, my plan is still to be doing this in another 10 and even 20 years' time. I don't see. You see some people, people who are in the 90s who are doing running and taking on events. So I think, well, why not? Why not? I might not.
Fantastic.
I won't be doing it at the same pace, but hopefully I'll still be doing something.
Yeah, definitely, Steve. Thank you so much for sharing your story today. I really appreciate it. Best of luck with those two races and all the other ones to come. And thank you so much for joining me today on the Running Tales podcast.
Craig, thank you for asking me to join you. Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Fantastic, folks. If you've enjoyed Steve's story, please listen back to all our other stories on Running Tales. Please go and donate to those two fantastic causes that Steve mentioned there. And also, of course, do me a little bit of a solid as well. Like or subscribe to us wherever you listen. Check out our Substack, runningtales.substack.com. We're on all the usual sort of places, Instagram and Facebook as well. So come and join us there. Come and continue the conversation. And I'll be back next week for another episode of the Running Tales podcast.